The warehouse motion alarm kept going off every night at 2:14 a.m. The problem was, I was the only person working the night shift, and the sensor that kept triggering was in a section of the building that had been sealed off for months. By the fifth night, I stopped resetting the alarm because I wanted to see what was moving back there. I worked nights at a distribution warehouse outside the city, mostly handling late deliveries and logging outgoing freight for the morning crew. It was a big concrete building with high shelving, loading docks on one side, offices in the front, and a fenced storage section in the back that had been closed for months after a sprinkler leak damaged part of the inventory. Most of my shift was boring. Scan manifests, check dock doors, answer the occasional trucker who showed up early, and keep an eye on the alarm panel in the front office. A security system divided the building into zones: dock area, main storage floor, office hallway, and back storage section. Motion sensors covered all of the areas after hours, but the company had me bypass certain zones while I worked. The back storage section was supposed to stay armed all night because no one was allowed in there until repairs were finished. That was the zone that kept triggering. The first night, I thought I'd done something wrong setting the panel. At 2:14 a.m., the keypad started beeping and the display flashed. Zone 6, back storage motion. I walked back there with my flashlight, expecting to find a loose door or maybe a raccoon that got in through a loading vent. The fencing around the section was intact. The chain on the gate was locked. Nothing looked disturbed. Through the fence, I could see wrapped pallets, damp cardboard stacks, and the dark plastic sheeting the cleanup company had hung months earlier. No movement, no sound. I reset the alarm and went back to the office. The second night, same time. 2:14 exactly. Same zone. I checked the logs. The system wasn't showing a general fault or power fluctuation. It was logging actual motion in Zone 6 for 2 to 3 seconds and then clearing. Not enough to keep the alarm active, just enough to trip it. I called my supervisor Rick the next morning and told him one of the sensors in the damage section was probably failing. He said maintenance would look at it when they got around to it. They didn't. So, on the third night, when it went off again at 2:14, I was already waiting for it. This time, I didn't go straight back there. I checked the camera system first. The warehouse only had a few good cameras inside, mostly aimed at dock doors and the main aisles. But one of them covered the fenced entrance to the back storage section. I rewound the footage from a minute before the alarm. At 2:13 and 48 seconds, the picture was normal. At 2:14 and 1 second, the camera flickered once. At 2:14 and 3 seconds, the plastic sheeting hanging behind the fence shifted slightly, like someone had brushed past it. Then it stopped. That got my attention. It still wasn't enough to prove anything. Air circulation, maybe. A pressure change from one of the rooftop units kicking on. But it bothered me because the movement was low to the ground and localized. Not the kind of full sheet flutter you'd expect from airflow. So, I went back there again. The gate was still locked. I checked the chain with my flashlight. No cut marks, no fresh scratches, nothing. Then, I noticed something on the concrete just inside the fence. A wet footprint. Not a full shoe print, more like the front half of one darkened against the dust. I remember crouching to look at it through the fence and thinking it had to be old, maybe left by the cleanup crew weeks ago when the floor was still damp. But when I put my flashlight lower, I could see a second one further in. Fresh enough that the edges were still sharp. The next day, I told Rick again that someone needed to check it out. He sounded irritated, like I was turning a small maintenance issue into a story. He told me if it happened again, to photograph anything unusual and send it to him. He also said not to enter the damaged section alone, which would have been helpful if I'd actually had a way in without bolt cutters. That night, I brought my phone charger into the office and kept the camera app open. At 2:14, the alarm went off again. This time, I caught something else before I even stood up. From the office, if the building was quiet enough, you could hear certain sounds carry through the warehouse. Metal settling, a pallet jack wheel squeaking, dock chains moving in the wind. When Zone 6 triggered, I heard a rolling sound, very short, like a cartwheel turning half a rotation on concrete. I froze and listened for it again. Nothing. I went to the monitor. The camera at the fenced section was blurry for a second, like before. But this time, one of the plastic sheets was moving, wider, slower, then settling back in place. I took a picture of the screen and headed down there. The footprint from the night before had dried. But near the gate, on the dust-coated concrete outside the fence, there was something new. A dragged line, thin, curved, like the mark left by something with a small, hard wheel. It led toward the gate, then stopped. Not under it, not through it, just up to it. I sent the picture to Rick. He didn't answer until almost an hour later. All he texted back was, "Don't go in there. I'll review it in the morning." That was not reassuring. The fifth night was the one that changed how I thought about it. I got to work early and checked all the doors myself. Dock doors latched, side exits shut, fence section still locked. Then I set my phone on a shelf facing the alarm panel, so I'd have a record of the time if it went off again. At 2:14, Zone 6 triggered right on schedule. But this time, another zone flashed immediately after it. Zone 5, service corridor door. That was the corridor that ran along the back wall of the warehouse and connected to the damaged storage section through an old fire door. It was supposed to be inaccessible from the warehouse side because the door had been chained shut after the leak. I grabbed my flashlight and headed there fast. The service corridor was narrow, concrete block walls, exposed pipe overhead. My beam caught the chained fire door at the far end. The chain was still wrapped around the push bar, but the door was open 3 inches. Not enough to walk through, just enough to show darkness on the other side. That honestly scared me more than the alarm had. Not because it was impossible, but because it meant someone could be in there physically pulling on that door from the inside. I stopped about 10 feet away and called out. No answer. Then my radio crackled. Just static at first, and then one sharp burst like someone had keyed a mic and let go. I backed up and called the police. While I waited, I stayed in the office and watched the camera aimed at the fenced section. Nothing moved again. When officers arrived, they did a full sweep with me and a bolt cutter from the maintenance cage. Inside the damaged section, the air smelled stale and wet. Pallets sat under torn plastic. A few cartons had collapsed on the floor where the leak had gotten to them months ago. Near the rear wall, they found the source of the wheel mark. A small, flatbed stock cart. One of ours. The wheels were damp. That made no sense because the floor around it was dry. One officer shined his light on the wall behind the cart and found the real problem. There was a narrow gap where part of the temporary repair panel hadn't been sealed properly. It opened into an old utility passage between the warehouse and the neighboring unit, just wide enough for a person to slip through sideways. That passage led to an abandoned section of the next building over. And in that passage, they found blankets, food wrappers, empty water bottles, and a cheap radio. Someone had been living in there. The police figured whoever it was had been coming into the damaged storage section late at night, moving carefully enough to avoid detection most of the time, and using the old stock cart to move supplies. The motion sensor caught him. The service door alarm triggered when he tried the chained fire door from the inside, maybe because he heard me coming and wanted another way out. They never found him. What bothered me afterward was the schedule. The wrappers and bottles proved somebody had been there. That part had a real explanation. But when the alarm company pulled the history for us, Zone 6 had triggered at 2:14 a.m. for 9 straight nights before I noticed it, including 2 nights I wasn't working. So either that guy had his own routine down to the minute, or he knew exactly when the warehouse would be quiet enough to move. I quit a month later for unrelated reasons. A few weeks after that, Rick texted me a picture from the alarm panel. Same warehouse, same zone. Zone 6, back storage motion, 2:14 a.m. By then, the utility passage had already been sealed with concrete and wire mesh. He added one line under the photo. Building was empty.